In a city ruled by technology, a humble young man struggles to balance his dreams with family duties. After rescuing a stray dog, he catches the attention of a billionaire in a wheelchair who changes his life's path. But as he steps into the world of the powerful, he learns that staying true to himself is the hardest part. If this story interests you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us which city you are watching from. Continuing. The sun was still struggling against the early morning clouds when Ethan Miller felt the weight of reality crush his dreams once again. At 22 years old, he carried on his shoulders not only the responsibility of supporting his mother, but also the silent pain of every no he received in his job interviews. On that Tuesday morning, he put on his only dress shirt, the same one he had been wearing for months in every attempt to land, an opportunity in the corporate world. The fabric was slightly faded at the sleeves, and there was a small, almost imperceptible stain on the right cuff, the result of a pen that had leaked during a previous interview. But it was all he had, and Ethan treated it as if it were the combat uniform of a soldier about to enter battle. The synthetic leather briefcase he carried contained his meticulously organized documents, an accounting degree from the state university, a transcript with grades that reflected entire nights of study, and dozens of resumes printed on plain paper, but with impeccable formatting that he had learned to do himself by watching YouTube videos. Mrs. Sarah Miller, his mother, watched her son prepare for another interview with a mix of pride and concern that only mothers can express. Her hands, calloused from years of working as a housekeeper for wealthy families, had provided Ethan with an education she had never had. Every penny saved, every hour of overtime worked, every silent sacrifice had been invested in the dream of seeing her son escape poverty through knowledge. "Son, have this hearty breakfast before you leave," she said, handing him a chipped mug that had served thousands of breakfasts over the years. "And remember that you are worth a lot, regardless of what those men in suits say." Ethan smiled at his mother, trying to hide the anxiety that grew in his chest like a hungry beast. He knew that every rejected interview was not just a lost opportunity for him, but also another month of financial worries for Sarah, who never complained, but whom he saw counting and recounting coins every time she went to the market. The bus that would take him to the financial district was more crowded than usual. Ethan squeezed in between laborers returning from the night shift and women heading to their jobs as domestic workers and cleaning assistants. They all shared the same tired air of those who fought daily against social inequality, but few carried the same flame of determination that shone in Ethan's brown eyes. During the hour-long commute, he mentally rehearsed the answers he had prepared for the most common questions. His salary expectations, always flexible, his strengths, dedication and a will to learn, his previous experiences, unpaid internships and informal jobs that he had transformed into lessons in leadership and problem-solving. When the bus stopped in front of the commercial building complex, Ethan felt the familiar knot in his stomach that always accompanied him in these moments. The glass buildings rose like ivory towers, reflecting a world that seemed unreachable for someone like him. Men and women in impeccable suits walked with hurried steps, phones glued to their ears, discussing deals that moved more money than his family saw in years. The company's reception was an environment that tried to be intimidating without appearing hostile. Cold marble, perfectly positioned artificial plants, and a receptionist who smiled with her lips but not with her eyes. Ethan announced himself with the firm voice he had practiced in front of the mirror, but inside he felt like an intruder in enemy territory. The waiting room was occupied by 5 other candidates, all clearly from a different economic reality than his own. They talked among themselves about postgraduate degrees from renowned private universities, study abroad experiences, and family connections in the financial market. Ethan remained silent, pretending to read a corporate magazine, while observing how the confidence of those young people contrasted glaringly with his own social insecurity. When his name was called, Ethan stood up, with the dignity that Sarah had taught him. "Never bow your head to anyone," she always said. "You are worth as much as any rich man's son. The difference is only in the bank account." The interview room was dominated by a polished mahogany table where 3 executives sat like judges in a courtroom. The man in the center, approximately 45 years old, examined Ethan's resume with an expression that varied between boredom and condescension. His colleagues flanked him with equally intimidating postures, as if they were experts at detecting inadequacies in candidates. "So, Ethan," the lead executive began, without bothering to introduce himself, "I see you studied at a state university. Interesting." The word interesting was pronounced with a tone that made it clear it wasn't exactly a compliment. Ethan took a deep breath before responding. "Yes, sir. I consider myself privileged to have had access to quality public education. I learned a lot about determination and overcoming obstacles during those years." "And your salary expectations?" Another executive cut in, showing no interest in the previous answer. "I am open to negotiation. I believe my performance should speak for itself before we discuss compensation," Ethan replied, using a phrase he had rehearsed dozens of times. The three men exchanged looks that spoke louder than words. It was the type of silent communication that people from the same social circle mastered perfectly, the ability to judge and dismiss someone without needing to verbalize prejudices. "Ethan," the lead executive said, leaning back in his leather chair, "you have adequate qualifications, there's no doubt, but this position requires a profile that aligns with our organizational culture." "May I ask what kind of alignment you are referring to?" Ethan questioned, feeling he was on dangerous ground. "Well, our clients come from a very specific segment of society. They expect to interact with professionals who understand their language, their values, their expectations. It's a matter of, how shall I say, cultural compatibility." The words fell like stones in Ethan's stomach. He understood perfectly what was being communicated without being said directly. His social background, his accent that still carried traces of the South Side, his lack of family connections in the business world, all of it made him culturally incompatible with what the company was looking for. "I understand," Ethan replied, maintaining the dignity his mother had taught him even when the world tried to take it from him. "Thank you for the opportunity to speak with you." He left the room with his head held high, but with his heart broken once again. In the elevator, he looked at his reflection in the polished mirror and saw the same intelligent and determined young man who had entered an hour before. Nothing had changed in him. The problem was in a world that could not see his value beyond his social origin. On the street, he walked slowly toward the bus stop, processing another rejection that confirmed a cruel reality. In America, merit was not always enough to overcome invisible but very real socio-economic barriers. At that moment, walking among the buildings that symbolized a world that seemed to deny him entry, Ethan did not imagine that a few hours later, his life would take a completely unexpected direction. He didn't know that a simple act of kindness would change his trajectory forever, bringing him into contact with people who would see in him exactly what those executives were unable to recognize: immense potential just waiting for the right opportunity to flourish. The weight of disappointment accompanied Ethan's every step as he walked through the busy streets of the downtown business district. The rejection still echoed in his ears like a persistent echo, not because of the words that were said, but because of all those that remained suspended in the air, loaded with prejudices that no legislation could combat. He decided not to take the bus immediately. He needed time to process what had just happened, to find strength before going home and facing Sarah's hopeful gaze. He knew she would ask about the interview with that smile she always reserved for moments she believed were important, and he didn't have the heart to crush her expectations so soon. The streets of the financial district teemed with an energy that contrasted brutally with his state of mind. Executives ran between meetings, talking on the phone about deals that moved fortunes. Elegant women stepped out of taxis with bags from sophisticated stores. Delivery riders pedaled furiously between luxury cars, carrying lunches that cost more than Sarah spent on food in an entire week. Ethan observed this world with a mixture of fascination and bitterness. He had studied this reality for years at the university, analyzed charts on income distribution and social inequality. But being there, being rejected, for being part of the statistics he had studied, gave those abstract numbers a completely different dimension. He stopped at a traffic light and noticed a giant screen at the top of a commercial building. The ad showed a company called Horizon Tech, with the slogan "Innovation for Everyone" flashing in bright blue letters. The irony of the message did not go unnoticed. "Innovation for everyone except for those who really need it," he muttered to himself. The light turned green, and Ethan began to cross along with dozens of other people. It was at this moment, in the middle of the anonymous crowd, that life had a habit of playing its most unexpected tricks. The sound of screeching tires cut through the air, followed by a cacophony of horns and screams. A golden retriever had gotten lost in the middle of traffic. The animal, clearly a pet by its well-groomed coat and quality leather collar, ran desperately between the cars, completely disoriented by the noise and movement. Its eyes were wide with terror, and it barked in panic as it tried to find a way out of that labyrinth of metal and asphalt. The reaction of the people was instantaneous and revealing. Some stopped to watch the spectacle, filming with their phones as if it were free entertainment. Others diverted their path, annoyed by the inconvenience that disrupted their routine. Drivers honked impatiently, some shouting obscenities out the window, more concerned with their schedules than with the life of the animal in danger. "Get out of the way, mutt," shouted a BMW driver, slamming his hand on the horn. "Someone get that dog out of there," yelled another, accelerating dangerously close to the animal. Ethan stopped in the middle of the sidewalk, watching the scene with growing indignation. The contrast was brutally clear. Here was a helpless creature, obviously lost and terrified, and no one moved a finger to help. Everyone was in too much of a hurry, had too many important commitments, too busy lives to care about a living being that needed help. For a moment, Ethan hesitated. He was still shaken by the interview, without the emotional energy to get involved in more problems. Besides, stepping into the middle of heavy traffic to save a dog wasn't exactly the definition of sensible behavior. Any rational person would keep walking and let others resolve the situation. But when a bus passed just inches from the animal, which managed to throw itself to the side at the last second, something inside Ethan broke. Maybe it was the accumulated indignation from the injustices he had faced that morning. Maybe it was the memory of all the times he himself had felt lost and helpless, with no one to help him. Or maybe it was simply the impossibility of standing still in the face of another's suffering. "Hey, buddy!" Ethan shouted, walking calmly toward the dog. His voice cut through the chaos of traffic with surprising tranquility. "Easy, boy, no one's going to hurt you." Cars continued to pass around him, but Ethan moved forward with slow and deliberate movements, completely ignoring the risks. His outstretched hands and body posture conveyed calm, as if he had done this hundreds of times before. The dog stopped running and looked at Ethan with eyes that mixed fear and hope. There was something in the young man's voice, a natural authority that transcended species, that made the animal relax slightly. "That's it, big guy," Ethan continued, approaching slowly. "Let's get out of this mess together." A truck was approaching at high speed, the driver apparently distracted by his phone. Ethan quickly calculated the distance and speed. He had seconds to act. Without hesitating, he scooped the dog into his arms and ran to the sidewalk, feeling the wind of the truck pass behind his back. In the safety of the sidewalk, Ethan placed the animal on the ground and knelt to examine it. The dog was obviously expensive. Its coat was professionally groomed, its nails trimmed, its collar made of genuine leather with a gold identification tag. "Cooper," Ethan read on the tag. "If found, call—" The number was engraved in small letters, but still legible. A small crowd formed around them. Some people applauded discreetly, others made comments about Ethan's courage. But what impressed him most was Cooper's reaction. The dog, which moments before had been in total panic, was now calm, looking at Ethan with a trust that bordered on veneration. "Man, that was really brave," said a middle-aged woman. "I would never have the courage to go into the middle of that traffic." "That dog must belong to a wealthy family," observed a man in a suit. "Look at the quality of that collar." Ethan took out his phone, a simple, old model, but one that worked perfectly for his needs, and dialed the number on the tag. After a few rings, a professional female voice answered. "Office of Mr. Edward Sterling, good morning." "Hi, good morning. My name is Ethan Miller. I found a dog named Cooper that was lost in traffic. This number was on his collar." "Cooper! The woman's voice changed completely, filled with relief. "Where are you? Mr. Sterling is desperate, looking for him. I'm on Michigan Avenue in front of Water Tower Place. Please don't leave. Someone will pick him up in 15 minutes. Thank you so much for saving Cooper." While he waited, Ethan sat on a low wall with Cooper at his side. The dog had leaned against him as if they were long-time friends, and this brought unexpected comfort after the difficult morning he had had. "You must have a family that loves you very much, right, Cooper?" Ethan spoke, stroking the animal's head. "Everyone should have someone who worries when they disappear." Cooper looked at him with those intelligent brown eyes, as if he understood every word. 15 minutes later, a luxury black van pulled up in front of them. Two men in suits stepped out, clearly professional security. One of them approached Ethan. "Are you the one who found Cooper?" "Yes, that's me. Mr. Sterling would like to thank you personally. He is at the company, just a few minutes from here. Could you accompany us?" Ethan looked at his wrinkled clothes and his old synthetic leather briefcase. He wasn't exactly dressed to meet someone important enough to have security and a chauffeured van. "I'm not very presentable," he said, trying to find a polite excuse. "Mr. Sterling doesn't care about those formalities. He just wants to meet the person who saved his best friend." Cooper had run to the van and was now looking at Ethan as if inviting him in. There was something in the animal's eyes, an almost human intelligence, that made Ethan feel that refusing would be an offense not only to the owner, but to Cooper himself. "All right," he finally agreed, "but it has to be quick." The van was a completely different world inside. Leather seats, silent air conditioning, a small refrigerator, a television screen. It was more luxurious than any means of transport Ethan had ever experienced. Cooper settled in beside him, resting his head on his lap with a naturalness that surprised even the security guards. "Cooper only does that with special people," the driver commented, looking through the rearview mirror. "He has a very sharp instinct for judging character." A few minutes later, the van stopped in front of a building Ethan recognized immediately. It was the exact same one where he had seen the Horizon Tech ad. The irony of the situation was not lost on him. A few hours ago, he was looking at that screen with bitterness. Now he was about to enter the building as a guest of someone apparently very important. The reception of Horizon Tech was a clear demonstration of how money could create environments that simultaneously intimidated and impressed. The high ceiling, decorated with LED panels that simulated the sky, created a sense of spaciousness that made any visitor feel small. The white marble walls reflected a soft, artificial light that eliminated shadows, giving the place an almost ethereal quality. Ethan observed everything with keen eyes, noting every detail that confirmed the social abyss between his world and that environment. Employees moved with silent efficiency, wearing clothes that cost more than his family spent in 3 months. Their body postures radiated a confidence that only came from never having doubted their place in the world. Cooper walked beside Ethan as if he owned the place, guiding him through the corridors with the familiarity of someone born into that universe of discreet luxury. The contrast was almost comical, a young man from the South Side in wrinkled clothes being escorted by a golden retriever through the heart of American economic power. The elevator that took them to the top floor was a work of silent engineering. Ethan didn't even feel when they started to go up, only noticing the numbers changing on the digital display. Through the glass walls, the city stretched below him like a three-dimensional map, revealing a perspective that few people had the privilege to contemplate. "I've never been this high up," Ethan murmured, more to himself than to the security guards. "Mr. Sterling says the height helps maintain perspective," one of them replied, surprising Ethan with the philosophical answer. When the elevator doors opened, they revealed a corridor that looked like it was out of an architectural magazine. Carefully selected works of art decorated the walls, each piece probably worth more than Ethan would earn in years of work. But there was something different about this place compared to other corporate environments he had visited that morning. There was human warmth behind the sophistication. An elegant woman, approximately 35 years old, approached with a genuine smile. Her hair was pulled back in a professional bun, but her eyes carried a kindness that couldn't be faked. "You must be Ethan," she said, extending her hand. "I'm Claire, Mr. Sterling's personal assistant. We don't have words to thank you for what you did for Cooper." Ethan shook her hand, noting that she showed no embarrassment or hesitation in greeting him, despite the obvious social difference between them. "I only did what any decent person would do," he replied, genuinely uncomfortable with the thanks. "Actually, no," Claire said gently. "Our security told me that several people passed by Cooper before you. No one stopped to help. Cooper had dashed down the hall, clearly knowing exactly where he wanted to go. Claire and Ethan followed him to a double mahogany door that opened automatically as they approached. The office was the kind of environment Ethan had seen only in movies, large enough to house an entire family, with windows offering a 360-degree panoramic view of the city. But what caught his attention most was the man sitting behind the desk. Edward Sterling was approximately 52 years old, with perfectly cut grey hair and eyes that radiated a piercing intelligence. He was in a technologically advanced wheelchair, equipped with controls that looked like they were out of a science fiction movie. Cooper ran directly to Edward, who received the animal with a pure joy that completely transformed his expression. For a moment, the powerful businessman disappeared, and simply a man relieved to find his best friend emerged. "Cooper, you gave me the biggest scare of my life," Edward spoke, stroking the dog with movements that revealed years of intimacy between them. Then he looked up at Ethan, and in that look there was an assessment that went far beyond the surface. Edward had the kind of intelligence that read people like open books, the result of decades building a business empire in a world where trust was a currency more valuable than money. "You must be the hero of the day," Edward said, maneuvering his chair to approach. "I'm no one's hero, sir. I just helped a lost dog." The answer seemed to please Edward, who smiled for the first time since Ethan had entered the room. "What's your name?" "Ethan Miller." "Edward Sterling, CEO of Horizon Tech." Edward extended his hand, and when Ethan shook it, he felt the firmness of someone accustomed to doing business based on the strength of a handshake. But there was something more in that contact, a mutual assessment that transcended social formalities. "Claire told me Cooper was in the middle of Michigan Avenue. Heavy traffic at this hour. He was terrified. Anyone would have done the same." Edward laughed softly, a sound that carried decades of experience with human nature. "Ethan, my security told me that at least 10 people passed by Cooper before you appeared. Some even filmed with their phones, as if it were entertainment." Edward maneuvered his chair to the window, where the city stretched out like a carpet of concrete and dreams. "Do you know what impresses me most about your attitude? You didn't hesitate. You stepped into the middle of the cars without calculating risks, without thinking of personal benefits." "I couldn't let him get hurt." "Why not?" The question caught Ethan off guard. It was so simple, yet so complex at the same time. "Because it was the right thing to do." Edward turned his chair and fixed his eyes on Ethan, as if he had found exactly the answer he expected. "Ethan, may I ask what you do professionally?" The question brought back all the frustration of the morning. Ethan felt the weight of the recent rejection, but something in Edward's tone encouraged him to be honest. "I'm looking for a job. I have an accounting degree, but I haven't found my opportunity yet. And in the meantime, I help a friend in an electronics repair shop. It's not much, but it's honest work." Edward nodded as if this information added important pieces to a puzzle he was mentally assembling. "Ethan, I have a proposal that might sound strange, but I want you to consider it carefully." "What kind of proposal?" "I need someone I can trust to work directly with me. Not a regular employee, but someone who can assist me in special projects that require a different perspective than my own." Ethan frowned, completely confused. That conversation had taken a direction his mind couldn't properly process. "Sir, you don't know me. How can you—" "Trust me." Edward pointed to Cooper, who had positioned himself exactly between them as if he were a silent mediator. "Cooper has known me for 8 years. He has never been wrong about a person. He has an instinct for kindness that I have learned to respect, and today he chose you." "That's very generous, but I don't understand why." Edward approached again. And when he spoke, his voice carried a sincerity Ethan didn't expect to find in someone of that social position. "Because I need someone who has the courage to do the right thing, even when it's inconvenient. Someone who doesn't calculate personal advantages when it comes to helping others." Edward paused, looking out the window at the city below. "Ethan, I'm going to be completely honest with you. I have a lot of money, a lot of power, many people working for me, but few true friends. Wealth has a peculiar way of attracting opportunists and pushing away authentic people. Sir, let me finish. I'm not offering charity. I'm offering a partnership based on mutual benefit. You help me, I help you. Simple as that. What kind of help would you need from me? I need someone to keep me connected with the reality that most Americans live. When you spend years in an ivory tower like this, you lose perspective on things." Edward gestured toward the window, where the city stretched to the horizon. "From up here, people look like ants. But you live among them. You know their real needs, their dreams, their difficulties. That perspective is worth more than any expensive consulting I could hire. And what would I get out of this? A chance to make a real difference in people's lives, and resources to turn your ideas into reality. I'm not just talking about a salary, but an opportunity for social impact." Ethan stood in silence, trying to process the magnitude of what was being offered. A few hours ago, he was being rejected by executives who barely looked at his resume. Now, one of the most powerful men in the country was offering a partnership that seemed too good to be true. "You don't have to answer now," Edward continued. "Think about it calmly. But know that opportunities like this don't come every day. May I ask why you're doing this?" Edward was pensive for a moment, his eyes fixing on a framed photograph on his desk, a young and beautiful woman holding a baby. "Because it's been a long time since I've seen someone do something good without expecting anything in return, and it reminded me of who I was before I got here." Claire appeared discreetly at the office door. "Mr. Sterling, your 4 o'clock meeting has arrived." Edward picked up a business card from his desk and handed it to Ethan. The card was heavy, made of special paper with gold embossing. "Think about the proposal, Ethan, but don't take too long. Sometimes life offers windows of opportunity that close quickly." Ethan took the card, feeling its weight between his fingers, as if it were a talisman loaded with possibilities. "Thank you, Mr. Sterling, for everything. I should be thanking you. You saved my best friend today." Cooper approached Ethan one last time, placing a paw on his leg as a gesture of farewell. There was an almost human intelligence in the animal's eyes, as if he knew he had been the architect of that impossible encounter. "Bye, Cooper. Take good care of your owner." As the security guards accompanied him back to the elevator, Ethan felt he was leaving behind more than just a luxurious office. He was leaving a world of possibilities he had never imagined being within his reach, carrying with him a business card that weighed like the key to a completely different future. The trip back home passed like a slow-motion movie. Ethan observed the city through the window of the luxury van, seeing the familiar urban landscape through completely new lenses. The same buildings, the same streets, the same people, but now everything carried a different meaning, as if the world had been recolored by possibilities that didn't exist a few hours. "Go." Edward's card burned in his pocket like a live coal. Ethan touched it occasionally through the fabric of his pants, making sure it hadn't just been an elaborate dream created by his frustrated mind. The paper was real, heavy, with a texture his calloused hands had never experienced. It was physical proof that something extraordinary had happened in his ordinary life. When the van stopped at the bus stop nearest his neighborhood, Ethan thanked the security guards and stepped out into the reality he knew so well. The contrast was brutal, from the controlled and silent environment of the vehicle to the familiar noise of the South Side, where loud music competed with the voices of street vendors and the constant roar of motorcycles. He walked through the familiar streets with slower steps than usual, needing time to process everything that had happened. The simple houses, the streets with incomplete asphalt, the tangled wires that created a complex web over the heads of the residents, everything seemed simultaneously familiar and strange, as if he was seeing his own life through someone else's eyes. Some neighbors greeted him from their doorways, the same warm greetings as always. But Ethan felt different, inside carrying a secret he didn't yet know how to share. How to explain that he had saved a billionaire's dog. How to tell them he had received a job offer that seemed straight out of a movie. Ryan's electronics repair shop was closed, a paper sign taped to the door stating "back in 1 hour." Ethan smiled, knowing his friend well. He was probably at the park performing for the neighborhood kids, spreading joy with his juggling and jokes that always drew laughter from the little ones. Instead of going straight home, Ethan decided to look for Ryan. He needed to talk to someone about what had happened, and his best friend was the only person in the world he trusted completely. Ryan had a street wisdom that perfectly complemented Ethan's formal education, and his perspectives always helped him see situations from different angles. He found Ryan exactly where he imagined, in the center of the small community park, surrounded by a dozen children who watched hypnotized by his juggling skills. 3 colored balls danced in the air like orbiting planets, rising and falling in a rhythm that seemed to defy the laws of physics. And then the clown discovered that the true magic was inside him. Ryan concluded his story, making the balls disappear with a theatrical flourish that drew enthusiastic applause from the small audience. The children eventually dispersed, leaving a few coins in Ryan's hat before running home. It was little money, but Ethan knew that for his friend those performances weren't just about financial support. They were about joy, human connection, the satisfaction of making others smile. "Long face," Ryan observed when he saw Ethan approaching. "Let me guess, another interview that didn't work out?" "Actually, it's much more complicated than that." Ryan packed up his gear and sat on the park bench next to Ethan. There was an attentive quality in his eyes, the same concentration he dedicated to his juggling, but now focused entirely on his best friend. "Tell me what happened." Ethan took a deep breath and began to narrate the day's events. The frustrating interview, the walk through the city, the lost dog in traffic, the risky rescue, the luxury van, the meeting with Edward Sterling, the unexpected proposal. As he spoke, he saw Ryan's expression change from initial curiosity to growing skepticism. "Ethan," Ryan said when the story ended, "are you sure this actually happened?" "I have his card right here," Ethan replied, taking the card from his pocket. Ryan examined the paper with the eyes of someone who had learned to distinguish the authentic from the fake on the streets. His fingers tested the texture, analyzed the gold engraving, studied every detail. "Man, this is real. Imported paper, gold engraving, premium quality." "So, you believe the story?" Ryan returned the card and was silent for a few moments, looking at the children playing at the other end of the park. "I believe it happened," he said finally, "but I don't believe the intentions." "What do you mean?" "Ethan, rich people don't help poor people out of the goodness of their hearts. There's always a second intention, a hidden benefit we don't see at the beginning." Ryan's response brought back all the doubts Ethan had managed to temporarily push away. His friend had life experience, knew the tricks that powerful people used to manipulate the most vulnerable. "Maybe Edward is different," Ethan suggested, but his own voice carried uncertainty. "Brother, nobody becomes a billionaire by being different. To get to the top of the pyramid, you have to step on a lot of people along the way." Ryan stood up and began walking in circles, a habit he had when processing complex information. "Think with me. One of the most powerful men in the country offers a partnership to a young man from the South Side he met 2 hours ago. That doesn't make sense in any capitalist universe, I know. What if it's my real chance to change my life? And what if it's a trap? What if you become a rich guy's puppet, losing your identity in the process?" The conversation was taking a turn that made Ethan uncomfortable. He had spent hours dreaming of the possibilities Edward's proposal represented, imagining how he could use a position of influence to help his community. "Ryan, what if I'm wasting the only real opportunity I've ever had? And what if you're running straight into a trap?" The two friends stood in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky with orange tones reflected in the windows of the simple houses around the park. "Promise me one thing," Ryan said finally, breaking the silence. "What?" "If you accept this proposal, don't forget where you came from. Don't turn your back on those who have always been by your side." "I would never do that, Ryan." Everyone says that before they get rich. Money has a strange way of changing people, of making them forget who they were before. Ethan extended his hand to his friend in the special handshake they had done since they were kids, a complex grip they had invented when they were 8 years old, and that continued to be their symbol of unquestionable loyalty. "We're brothers," Ethan said. "That will never change." "I hope not," Ryan replied, but there was genuine concern in his voice. When Ethan finally arrived home, Sarah was in the kitchen preparing dinner with the silent efficiency of someone who had perfected the art of creating nutritious meals with simple ingredients. The smell of beans seasoned with garlic and onions filled the small house, mixing with the aroma of rice simmering in an old but well-kept pot. "How was the interview, son?" she asked without turning around, continuing to stir the sauté. Ethan hesitated at the kitchen door. How to tell his mother about the surreal day he had had? How to explain that a frustrating rejection had turned into an opportunity that seemed too good to be true? "It didn't work out," he said, choosing to start with the obvious. "It wasn't meant to be this time," Sarah replied, with the simple wisdom she always offered in difficult moments. "God knows what he's doing." She turned to look at her son and noticed immediately that there was something different in his expression. But something good happened today too, didn't it? Maternal intuition was something that always impressed Ethan. Sarah had an almost supernatural ability to read his emotions, even when he tried to hide them. "How? Do you know?" "Because I've known you since you were born, and there's a different shine in your eyes today." Ethan sat at the kitchen table and told his mother everything. The rejection at the interview, the rescue of the dog, the meeting with Edward, the unexpected proposal. Sarah listened in silence, occasionally asking questions to clarify details, but mostly just absorbing the story with the total attention she reserved for truly important matters. When he finished, she turned off the stove and sat down next to her son. "Ethan, this could be very good or very dangerous." "How so dangerous, Mom?" "Son, I've worked my whole life as a housekeeper in rich people's homes. I know that world better than you imagine." Sarah paused, choosing her words carefully. "There are good people among the rich. Of course there are. People who really care about others. But there are also many people who use the poor as toys, who amuse themselves with our dreams without ever intending to fulfill them." "But Edward seemed sincere, Mom." "He might be. But you need to be careful. You can't let them use you or turn you into someone you're not." "How will I know if it's a trap?" Sarah took her son's hands in hers, hands that carried decades of hard work, but were still soft when offering affection. "Trust your heart, but don't turn off your head. If at any moment you feel you're losing your essence, that you're becoming a person I wouldn't recognize, come back home." "So you think I should accept?" "Son, you studied so hard, you worked so hard, you dreamed so much. If this is your chance to show your value to the world, you have to try." Sarah stood up and went back to the stove, but continued talking as she finished dinner. "Just never forget who you are. No matter how many zeros are in your bank account, how many expensive clothes you wear, or how many sophisticated places you frequent, you're still my son. You're still the boy I raised to be good, honest, and humble." "Thank you, Mum. You always know what to say. That's what mothers are for." That night, Ethan lay in his narrow bed in the small room he shared with his childhood memories. Edward's card was on the nightstand, illuminated by the faint light coming through the window. He picked it up and examined it once more, as if looking for hidden signs that could reveal the true intentions behind the proposal. He thought of Ryan's words about ulterior motives and traps. He thought of Sarah's advice about maintaining his identity. He thought of the sincerity he had seen in Edward's eyes, and the inexplicable connection he had felt with Cooper. But mostly, he thought of the possibilities. For the first time in his life, a door had opened to a world that had always seemed unreachable. Through that door he could glimpse opportunities not only for himself, but to help others like him, people who deserved chances but rarely received them. He picked up his old phone and dialed the number engraved on the card. After a few rings, a professional female voice answered. "Office of Mr. Edward Sterling, good evening." Good evening, I'm Ethan Miller. I'd like to speak with Mr. Sterling. Mr. Miller, Mr. Sterling has already left, but he asked me to wait for your call. May I pass along a message? You can tell him that I accept the proposal. Perfect. Mr. Sterling will be very happy. Can you be here tomorrow at 9 in the morning? We will begin your orientation with the company. I can, thank you. He hung up the phone and stared at the ceiling of the room, feeling a mixture of anxiety and excitement that made sleep impossible. In a few hours, his life would change forever. He didn't know if for better or worse, but he knew he couldn't waste that opportunity without at least trying. Outside, the neighborhood slept with the familiar noises of the night, distant music, conversations on the sidewalks, the occasional roar of motorcycles passing by. It was the soundtrack of his life until that moment. Tomorrow he would begin to hear completely different melodies, coming from a world he had always observed from afar, but never imagined he could reach. The alarm went off at 6 in the morning, but Ethan had already been awake for hours, staring at the ceiling of the small room while processing the magnitude of the day to come. Sleep had been intermittent, populated by strange dreams, where he walked through marble corridors wearing clothes he didn't recognize, speaking a language he didn't completely master. Sarah had woken up even earlier, and the smell of strong coffee already permeated the house when Ethan got up. On the kitchen table he found not only breakfast, but also a gift that made his heart race. A new navy blue suit, still with the tags, carefully laid out on a chair. "Mom, where did this come from?" "I borrowed it from Mrs. Jenkins' employer," she replied, nervously adjusting the tie that came with the set. "I told her it was for a special occasion for my son." Ethan felt his eyes fill with tears. He knew how much pride it had cost his mother to ask for that favor, how many embarrassing explanations she probably had to give. The suit represented more than new clothes. It was a symbol of the faith she had in his future. "Mom, you didn't have to." "Yes, I did. My son is going to work at an important company. He has to look the part." When Ethan dressed and looked at himself in the small bedroom mirror, he saw a version of himself he didn't completely recognize. The suit fit his body perfectly, transforming him externally into a more sophisticated version of who he was. But inside he was still the same young man from the South Side, carrying all the insecurities and hopes that had defined him until that moment. The bus ride to the financial district was a different experience from that morning. Instead of the looks of sympathy or indifference he usually received, he noticed some expressions of respect, as if the suit functioned as a passport to a world that was previously denied him. It was fascinating and a bit disturbing to realize how clothing could alter the way others saw him. He arrived at Horizon Tech 15 minutes early, time he used to observe the morning movement of the executives. There was a specific choreography to that corporate dance. Precise greetings, quick conversations about numbers and strategies, an efficiency that seemed almost military in its coordination. Claire met him at reception with the same warm smile as the day before, but now there was also an evident approval in her eyes upon seeing him properly dressed for the environment. "Good morning, Ethan. Ready for your first corporate adventure?" "As ready as someone can be to enter a completely new world. Mr. Sterling is looking forward to starting your orientation, but first there's someone he'd like you to meet." Claire led him through corridors that seemed even more impressive in the daylight. Employees moved with briefcases and tablets, speaking in technical language that sounded like a foreign dialect to Ethan. It was a universe that operated by its own rules, unwritten codes he would have to learn quickly. They stopped in front of a conference room with glass walls, where a clearly important meeting was taking place. Sitting around an oval table were about 8 people, all dressed impeccably, all emanating the confidence that came from never having questioned their place in the world. "It's the weekly board meeting," Claire explained. "Mr. Sterling wants you to observe how our internal dynamics work." Through the glass, Ethan could see Edward presiding over the meeting from his high-tech wheelchair, gesturing as he explained something about charts projected on a large screen. But what caught his attention most was a young woman about 28 years old, sitting to Edward's right. She was elegant without being flashy, wearing a women's suit that demonstrated authority without sacrificing femininity. Her brown hair was pulled back in a professional bun, and her eyes, even from a distance, conveyed a piercing intelligence that reminded him of Edward's own. When she spoke, the others around the table listened with respectful attention. "Who is she?" Ethan asked, intrigued by the young woman's commanding presence. "Eleanor Sterling, Mr. Sterling's daughter and director of our Social Innovation Division." The name sounded familiar, and Ethan vaguely remembered seeing references to her in articles about Horizon Tech. Eleanor had built a solid reputation for developing projects that combined advanced technology with social impact, an area that was gaining increasing importance in the corporate world. Is she good at what she does? One of the most brilliant minds in the company, Harvard grad, MIT specialization, but also has her feet on the ground. She's not the type who lives only in theory. The meeting ended and the executives began to leave the room. Edward gestured for Claire to bring Ethan, who felt a mixture of nervousness and curiosity as he approached. "Ethan," Edward greeted him warmly, "how do you feel on your first official day?" "Anxious and grateful for the opportunity. I want to introduce you to my daughter, Eleanor. This is Ethan Miller, the young man who saved Cooper yesterday." Eleanor turned to assess Ethan, and he immediately felt he was being subjected to a deep and professional analysis. Her green eyes were piercing, the kind that seemed to see through social masks and corporate diplomacy. "The famous savior of Cooper," she said, extending her hand for a firm greeting. "Dad hasn't stopped talking about you since yesterday." It was just what any decent person would do. Interesting. Modesty is a rare quality in this environment. There was something in Eleanor's tone that Ethan couldn't completely decipher. It wasn't hostility, but it wasn't exactly cordiality either. It was more like professional skepticism. "Eleanor runs our social projects division," Edward explained. "Coincidentally, she was developing an initiative that could benefit enormously from your perspective, Ethan." "What kind of initiative?" Ethan asked, genuinely curious. Eleanor studied him for a few more seconds before responding, as if deciding how much to reveal to someone who had not yet proven his value. "We are developing a digital platform to connect people from underprivileged communities with job opportunities and vocational training." "That sounds promising." "It does, yes, but between idealizing and implementing, there is a chasm that many social projects never manage to cross." Eleanor's response was clearly a test, a way to assess if Ethan had substance beyond good intentions. "What is the main obstacle?" "Really understanding the needs of the communities we want to help, not the needs we imagine they have, but those that actually exist." Ethan nodded, immediately understanding the point. He had seen many social projects fail for exactly that reason, well-meaning people creating solutions for problems they didn't completely understand. "And how do you intend to perform that analysis?" "We are still defining the methodology," Eleanor replied, and Ethan noticed a slight frustration in her voice. Edward observed the interaction between the two with evident satisfaction. "That was exactly what I wanted to talk about. Ethan, how about working with Eleanor on this project? Your life experience would be invaluable to ensure we develop something truly useful." Ethan felt a mixture of excitement and apprehension. Working directly with Edward's daughter meant immense responsibility, but also the opportunity to truly make a difference. It would be an honor. Eleanor, however, didn't seem completely convinced. "Dad, can I speak with you in private?" "Of course." "Ethan, how about familiarizing yourself with our company? Claire can show you our departments." Claire led Ethan on a tour that revealed the impressive complexity of Horizon Tech. The research and development department looked like it was out of a science fiction movie, with labs where technicians developed robotic prosthetics and accessibility devices. The financial sector functioned with military precision, analysts monitoring global markets in real time through dozens of screens. The company employs 5,000 people directly and generates work for another 15,000 indirectly, Claire explained as they walked. "But Mr. Sterling always says our true product isn't technological devices, it's human possibilities." In the Human Resources Department, Ethan was introduced to corporate policies that seemed from another planet compared to any job he had ever had. Comprehensive health insurance, education assistance, profit-sharing program. Employee daycare, benefits that represented economic security his family had never experienced. "Do all employees have access to these benefits?" he asked, still processing the generosity of the policies. "Everyone, from the janitor to the board of directors. Mr. Sterling believes that secure and happy employees produce better results." Meanwhile, in Edward's office, a tense conversation was taking place between father and daughter. "Dad, are you sure about this young man?" "I am. Why?" "Because we know nothing about him beyond an impulsive action with Cooper." Edward smiled, recognizing his daughter's pragmatism. "Eleanor, sometimes the best decisions are based on intuition, not exhaustive analysis, and sometimes intuitions lead us to expensive mistakes. It's possible, but they can also lead us to extraordinary discoveries." Eleanor walked to the window, looking at the city stretching below. "Dad, running this company isn't a game. Every decision affects thousands of people, millions of dollars. And that's exactly why we need people like Ethan. People who remind us that behind every number, there is a human being." Eleanor turned to face her father. "You want me to work with someone with no corporate experience on a project that could define my career?" "I want you to work with someone who can teach you things that no university could." Edward's response made Eleanor pause. She knew her father well enough to know that his intuitions were rarely wrong, but she also knew that the business world didn't forgive sentimentalism. "All right, but on one condition." "What?" "If he can't keep up the pace, if he becomes an obstacle instead of a contribution, we'll have to reevaluate." "Agreed. But give him a real chance, Eleanor. Don't judge him by the wrong standards." When Ethan returned from the tour, he found Edward and Eleanor waiting for him with expressions that suggested important decisions had been made. "Ethan," Edward said, "Eleanor has agreed to officially include you in the social platform project. You will start working together next Monday." Ethan looked at Eleanor, trying to read her expression. She didn't seem exactly enthusiastic, but there was a professional determination that suggested a willingness to give it a chance. "Thank you for the opportunity. I promise not to let you down." "Don't promise," Eleanor said with a seriousness that cut through the air. "Just deliver." At that moment, Ethan understood that he had entered a world where good intentions were not enough. Eleanor represented a standard of excellence he would have to reach if he truly wanted to be part of that universe. It was intimidating, but also exciting. Finally, someone who would challenge him to be better than he had ever imagined possible. Monday arrived with a light rain that left the streets of the business center with a mirrored shine, reflecting neon lights and headlights in an urban dance Ethan observed through the bus window. 3 days had passed since his first meeting with Eleanor. 3 days he spent compulsively studying everything he could find about social projects, digital platforms, and community development methodologies. Sarah had noticed the intensity with which he prepared, staying up late reading articles on the old computer they had bought used years ago. She said nothing, but left hot coffee by his side during his late-night study sessions, a silent support that was worth more than 1,000 words of encouragement. When he arrived at Horizon Tech that morning, Ethan felt better prepared, but also more nervous. Eleanor had made it clear that she would make no concessions because of his social background or lack of corporate experience. She expected excellence, and he would have to deliver. Claire directed him to a project room on the 20th floor, a space that had been specially adapted for collaborative work. The walls were covered with whiteboards, there were multiple screens for presentations, and a large central table to accommodate documents, laptops, and prototyping models. Eleanor was already there when he arrived, wearing a grey suit that combined professionalism with a natural elegance. She was talking on the phone in fluent English, discussing technical aspects of app development with someone who was apparently in another country. Ethan was impressed by the ease with which she moved between languages and complex concepts. "Sorry," she said when she finished the call. "Conference with our development team in London. There's a time difference, so we need to coordinate schedules carefully." "You have international teams?" "We have collaborators in 16 countries. Social technology is a global challenge that requires global perspectives." Eleanor activated one of the large screens and projected a presentation that had clearly been prepared specifically for that meeting. Before we start working together, I need you to understand the complexity of what we are trying to do. The first image showed statistics on social inequality in the United States. Numbers on unemployment, underemployment, access to education, and social mobility opportunities. They were data that Ethan knew theoretically, but seeing them organized that way gave the problem a different dimension. 43% of youth from underprivileged communities don't have access to formal job opportunities, Eleanor explained, not for lack of ability, but for lack of connections and information. And you believe technology can solve that? Technology can facilitate connections, but solve that depends on much more than apps and platforms. The next series of images showed previous attempts at similar projects, both in the US and in other countries. Some had been partial successes, others had failed completely. What we've learned studying these cases is that most fail for one specific reason. They are developed by people who have never lived the realities they are trying to solve. Ethan immediately understood he was being tested. And you think I can solve that disconnection? Maybe. Or maybe you're just another well-meaning person with no real understanding of the complexities involved. Eleanor's brutal honesty was simultaneously challenging and refreshing. Ethan appreciated working with someone who didn't try to sugarcoat difficult truths. Eleanor, may I ask a direct question? Always. Why are you so skeptical of me? Eleanor turned off the presentation and sat in the chair across from Ethan, a posture that suggested a willingness for a more personal conversation. Because I've seen dozens of social projects fail, projects run by well-meaning people who thought goodwill was enough to overcome complex structural problems. And you think I'm just another naive well-wisher? I don't know, that's why I'm testing you. Eleanor's frank answer created a moment of silence that wasn't uncomfortable, but contemplative. Can I tell you why this project is important to me? She continued. Please. My mother died when I was 12. Cancer. She was a social worker, worked in underprivileged communities, believed deeply that education and opportunity could transform lives. Eleanor paused, and Ethan realized she was sharing something deeply personal. In the last years of her life, she was frustrated because she saw that goodwill wasn't enough, that she needed resources, technology, organized systems to truly make a difference at scale. And you're trying to continue her work? I'm trying to use the privileges I inherited to create what she dreamed of, but never had the resources to build. The revelation completely changed the dynamic between them. Ethan understood that Eleanor wasn't just a privileged executive playing with social projects. She carried a personal mission that gave real emotional weight to the work. Eleanor, may I suggest something? What? How about we visit my neighborhood? Not as executives doing research, but as people trying to understand realities different from your own. Eleanor hesitated. It was obvious she had no experience with real fieldwork, especially in environments that were completely out of her comfort zone. Do you think it would be useful? I think it's essential. You can have all the statistical data in the world, but until you understand how real people live those numbers, any solution we develop will be theoretical. And what would this visit be like? Simple. We go, we talk to people, we listen to their stories, we understand their challenges. No corporate agenda, no formal presentations. Eleanor considered the proposal for a few minutes. How long has it been since you went to your neighborhood? I live there. I go back every day after work. The answer seemed to surprise Eleanor, who had apparently assumed that Ethan would move to a neighborhood closer to downtown now that he worked at Horizon Tech. You haven't thought about moving closer? Why would I? My life is there. My mother, my best friend, people who have known me since I was a child. Wouldn't it be more convenient? Maybe, but convenience isn't everything. Community matters too. Eleanor was pensive. It was obvious she was processing concepts that were not part of her personal experience. All right, let's visit your neighborhood. But on one condition. What? You also need to understand my world. You need to know the corporate pressures, the stakeholders, the complexities of large-scale implementation. Agreed. And one more thing. I need to meet your best friend. Ryan, why? Because people reveal a lot about themselves through the friends they choose. If we're going to work together, I need to understand who you really are. That afternoon, Eleanor and Ethan left Horizon Tech in a company van, but this time the destination was the South Side where Ethan had grown up. During the trip, he observed Eleanor absorb the urban landscape that gradually changed from the financial district to middle-class residential neighborhoods, and finally to the underprivileged communities. "It's different from what I imagined," she commented when they entered the neighborhood. "In what way?" "More organized. On television, these areas always seem chaotic. Here I see structure, people working, commercial establishments. Poverty doesn't mean disorder. It means a lack of resources, not a lack of dignity." Ethan's observation made Eleanor reflect on prejudices she didn't even know she carried. They found Ryan in the Central Park, finishing a performance for a group of children who watched hypnotized by his juggling skills. When he saw Ethan approaching with an elegantly dressed woman, Ryan immediately understood who she must be. "So you're the famous Eleanor," he said when the introductions were made. "Famous?" Ethan hasn't stopped talking. "About your work partnership." Eleanor studied Ryan with the same analytical attention she dedicated to any new situation. She saw a young man about 23 years old, simple but clean clothes, intelligent eyes that seemed to assess people with surgical precision. "Ethan told me you've been friends since you were kids." "We're brothers by choice," Ryan replied. "We grew up together, dreamed together, fought together." "And what do you think of his new career?" The question was direct, and Ryan appreciated the honesty. "I think it's an incredible opportunity. I also think it's risky." "Risky how?" "Because your world can change people, and I don't want Ethan to forget who he is." Eleanor nodded, understanding the legitimate concern behind Ryan's words. "Can I ask you a question, Ryan?" "Sure." "If you had unlimited resources to help your community, what would you do?" Ryan thought carefully before responding. "I would create real opportunities, not handouts, not charity. Opportunities for people to develop their talents and build their own lives." "How?" "Vocational training that actually leads to jobs, microcredit for small businesses, programs that connect local talent with larger opportunities." Eleanor was impressed by the sophistication of the answer. Ryan had spontaneously articulated concepts she had spent years studying at expensive universities. "Have you ever thought about working in social development?" "Every day, but I don't have the contacts or credentials that world requires." "And what if you did?" Ryan looked at Ethan, then at Eleanor, trying to understand where the conversation was going. "Eleanor," Ethan intervened, "are you suggesting what I think you're suggesting?" "I'm suggesting that maybe our team needs one more perspective, someone who understands both the community reality and creative possibilities for intervention." Ryan stood in silence for a few seconds, processing the magnitude of what was being offered. "Are you serious?" "Completely," Eleanor replied, "but it would be real work, with real responsibilities and high expectations." "I don't have a college degree." "You have something more valuable, practical knowledge and an authentic perspective." That afternoon, as they walked through the community talking to residents, shopkeepers and unemployed youth, Eleanor began to understand the human complexity behind the statistics she had studied for years. She saw mothers who worked 16 hours a day to support children, talented youth without opportunities, creative entrepreneurs limited by lack of capital and connections. When they returned to Horizon Tech at the end of the day, something had fundamentally changed between the three of them. They were no longer an executive, a director, and a street artist. They were collaborators united by a common vision of transformative possibilities. 3 weeks had passed since Eleanor, Ethan, and Ryan began working together, and the energy in the Horizon Tech project room was almost palpable. The walls were covered with detailed maps of 5 underprivileged communities in the metropolitan area, charts of needs identified through extensive interviews, and prototypes of a digital platform that was taking shape through dozens of iterations based on real feedback from residents. Ryan had adapted to the corporate environment in a way that surprised even Eleanor. His natural ability to connect with people, combined with a sharp, practical intelligence honed by years of life on the streets, brought insights that no expensive consulting could offer. He had become the bridge between Eleanor's technical world and the social reality Ethan represented. "Look at this," Ryan said that Thursday morning, spreading across the central table a series of interviews he had conducted during the week. "Talking with people in Oakwood Heights, I discovered that 70% of them have cell phones, but only 40% use apps beyond WhatsApp." Eleanor studied the data with the meticulous attention she dedicated to any new information. "Does that mean our initial premise was incorrect?" "Not incorrect," Ethan replied. "It means we need to create something simpler and more intuitive than we originally planned." "Exactly," Ryan agreed. "People want opportunities, but they also want dignity. No one wants to feel like they're asking for a favor or a handout through an app." Eleanor had learned to value these observations that came from lived experience. 3 weeks working with Ethan and Ryan had changed her perspective on social development. In a fundamental way, she was discovering that truly effective solutions were those co-created with the communities, not imposed by external experts. "So, what's our next stage?" she asked. "I think we need to test a functional prototype," Ethan suggested. "Something simple we can implement in a specific community to see how it works in practice." "Oakwood Heights would be ideal," Ryan added. "Mrs. Connie Jenkins, the president of the neighborhood association, has already shown interest in collaborating." Eleanor opened her laptop and began taking notes on the timeline and resources needed. Her mind was functioning in the strategic planning mode she had perfected during years of managing complex projects. For an effective pilot, we would need budget approval of at least $500,000. "Is that a lot?" Ethan asked. He was still getting used to the financial scales of the corporate world. "For Horizon Tech, it's relatively little, but to get approval, we would need to present a solid business case to the executive board." Ryan frowned. "A business case for helping people?" "Unfortunately, yes. The company needs to justify investments, even in social projects, through return metrics." "What kind of return?" Ethan questioned. "Social return, reputational return, and eventually financial return. If we can prove that well-executed social projects generate measurable benefits, we can expand to other communities." The conversation was interrupted when Claire knocked on the project room door. "Eleanor, sorry to interrupt, but Richard Vance would like to speak with you. He said it's about the social project." Eleanor and Ethan exchanged looks. Richard was the COO of the company, known for his strictly financial approach to all aspects of business. If he was interested in the project, it could be very good or very problematic. "Tell him we'll be in his office in 5 minutes." When Claire left, Ryan noticed the immediate tension that arose between Eleanor and Ethan. "Who is this Richard?" he asked. "Executive Vice President," Eleanor explained. "He's been here for 15 years, extremely competent, but also extremely focused on short-term financial results. And he doesn't like social projects? He doesn't like projects that don't generate immediate and measurable profit." Richard Vance's office reflected his personality. Modern, efficient, decorated with financial charts and business achievement trophies. Richard was a man of approximately 52 years, with perfectly combed grey hair and suits that cost more than the annual income of many American families. "Eleanor, Ethan," he greeted them with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I've been hearing interesting things about your project." "We hope they are positive things," Eleanor replied, maintaining a cautious professional tone. "It depends on the perspective. Sit down, please." Richard gestured to chairs in front of his desk, a configuration that created a clear dynamic of hierarchical power. "Ethan," he said, fixing his eyes on the young man, "I have to admit, curiosity about your background, academic training, previous professional experiences." The question carried an obvious subtext, and Ethan felt he was being assessed not for what he could contribute, but for what he might represent as a risk. "I have an accounting degree from the State University. I've worked in various informal jobs, and I have practical experience with the realities we want to impact through the project." "Interesting. And how do you assess your ability to manage significant financial resources?" "I learn quickly, and I have Eleanor's supervision in all technical and financial aspects. Richard nodded, but didn't seem completely satisfied with the answer. Eleanor, may I ask about the success metrics you've established? We are still defining specific indicators, but we focus on employability, family income, and community satisfaction. And return on investment? Social ROI is more complex to measure than financial ROI, but we are developing appropriate methodologies. Richard leaned back in his chair, assuming a posture that suggested professional skepticism. Eleanor, you are one of our most talented executives. I'm sure you understand the pressures we face to justify every cent invested. I understand perfectly. Then you must also understand my concern with projects that, however noble they may be in intention, could expose the company to unnecessary risks. Ethan felt the temperature of the room change. It was obvious. Richard was building an argument against the project. What kind of risks? Eleanor asked. Reputational risks if the project fails publicly, financial risks if costs exceed projections, operational risks if resources are diverted from core business activities. All projects have risks, Ethan intervened. The question is whether the potential benefits justify those risks. Richard studied him with an expression that mixed surprise and irritation. He clearly didn't expect to be challenged by someone he considered inexperienced. Ethan, do you have experience in corporate risk analysis? I have experience in personal risk analysis. Every day, people like me calculate risks and benefits of decisions that affect their lives and families. That is not exactly the same as business management, isn't it? You analyze data to make decisions about resource allocation. We analyze realities to make decisions about survival. The difference is that our consequences are more immediate and personal. The response left Richard visibly uncomfortable. Eleanor observed the interaction with growing admiration for Ethan's ability to articulate perspectives that the corporate world rarely considered. Well, Richard said, regaining control of the conversation, you need to understand that any project of this magnitude requires executive board approval. We understand, Eleanor replied. And to get that approval, you will need a much more robust business plan than you currently have. We are working on it. I hope so, because failures in high-visibility projects affect not only those directly responsible, but the entire reputation of the company. When they left Richard's office, Eleanor and Ethan walked in silence through the corridors of Horizon Tech until they reached the elevator. Was that a threat? Ethan asked when the doors closed. It was a warning disguised as a threat, Eleanor replied. Richard is making it clear he is watching our project closely, looking for any reason to question it. Why would he do that? Because social projects represent a change in corporate culture that some executives see as a threat to traditional business models. When they returned to the project room, they found Ryan analyzing more data from community interviews. How was the meeting? He asked, immediately noticing the tension on both their faces. Complicated, Eleanor replied. We have internal resistance to overcome beyond the technical challenges. What kind of resistance? Ethan explained the conversation with Richard, including the questions about qualifications and the veiled warnings about consequences of failure. So some executives don't want the project to succeed, Ryan concluded. More complex than that, Eleanor clarified. They don't necessarily oppose success, but they want to have control over how we define and measure that success. And what if our definitions of success are different from theirs? Then we'll have a problem. Ryan was pensive for a few moments. May I suggest something? Always, Eleanor replied. How about you create two versions of the business plan? One that speaks the corporate language Richard wants to hear. Another that reflects our real social impact goals? Eleanor smiled for the first time since the meeting with Richard. Ryan, that's brilliant. We can present financial and efficiency metrics they understand, while internally we keep focus on the human indicators that truly matter. Wouldn't that be dishonest? Ethan questioned. It wouldn't be dishonest, Eleanor corrected. It would be strategic. We are communicating the same information through different languages for different audiences. That afternoon, the three worked on creating a document that could satisfy both corporate expectations and their genuine social aspirations. It was a complex exercise in cultural translation, turning passion into spreadsheets, dreams into charts, hope into financial projections. "You know," Ryan said as they were finishing, "this reminds me of something my grandmother used to say." "What?" Eleanor asked. "That sometimes you have to speak the devil's language to do God's work." The observation made everyone laugh, but it also perfectly captured the nature of the challenge they faced. They were trying to use the tools of capitalism to create solutions for problems that capitalism itself had helped create. It was an irony that didn't go unnoticed, but it was also a unique opportunity. If they could prove that doing good could also be good for business, they would have created a replicable model that could transform not only communities, but the entire industry. The question was, could they navigate the treacherous waters of corporate politics without compromising the integrity of their mission? The Horizon Tech Executive Boardroom was designed to intimidate. An oval table of polished American mahogany, Italian leather chairs, walls decorated with photographs of historic company moments. Every element communicated power, tradition, and the seriousness of the decisions made in that sacred space of corporate capitalism. Eleanor, Ethan, and Ryan entered the room, carrying meticulously organized folders, laptops with presentations tested dozens of times, and a mixture of confidence and nervousness that only decisive moments can produce. They had spent 2 weeks preparing that presentation, knowing that 15 minutes could determine if months of work would become reality or just another dream archived on the company's computers. Edward was already positioned at the head of the table, his high-tech wheelchair integrated naturally into the corporate environment. Around the oval table, 7 other executives represented different aspects of the business empire. Richard, with his expression of professional skepticism, Paula Montgomery from finance, Charles Bennett from the legal department, and others whose reputations Eleanor knew through years of navigating the company's internal politics. "Good afternoon, everyone," Edward began with a smile that mixed paternal pride and business curiosity. "We are here to evaluate the social project proposal that Eleanor, Ethan, and Ryan have developed. You have 15 minutes to convince us that it's worth investing $500,000 in this initiative." Eleanor stood up first, activating the presentation screen with precise movements that reflected years of corporate experience. "Ladies and gentlemen, our proposal is called Digital Bridges, and it represents an opportunity to demonstrate social leadership while developing new markets for our products." The first image showed impressive statistics: 43% of underprivileged youth without access to formal work opportunities, 60% of micro and small businesses failing due to lack of market connections, 80% of residents in urban peripheries owning smartphones but underutilizing their productive potential. "The problem is not a lack of talent or a will to work," Eleanor continued. "The problem is a lack of bridges between human potential and economic opportunities." Ethan took the floor, feeling the weight of the attentive gazes, but also the strength of his personal conviction. "We spent 3 months talking directly with residents of 5 different communities, not through formal research or questionnaires, but through real conversations with real people about their real needs." He activated the next series of slides, showing photographs and quotes from residents they had interviewed. "We met Maria, a single mother of 3, who sews clothes at home but can't expand her business due to lack of access to clients. We met John, a self-taught electronics technician who repairs equipment in his backyard but never got a formal job due to lack of recognized certifications. We met dozens of people with valuable skills that our economy wastes for lack of connections." Ryan stood up, and his presence in the room brought a different energy, less corporate, more authentic, representing voices that were rarely heard in those decision-making environments. "The difference in our project is simple," he said, looking directly at each executive. "We're not creating solutions for people we've never met. We're co-creating solutions with people who live the problems we want to solve." Paula Montgomery, the CFO, raised her hand with a question everyone expected. "The numbers are impressive, but where is the return on investment for Horizon Tech?" Eleanor resumed the presentation, activating financial spreadsheets that had been carefully crafted to speak the language Paula understood. First, market development. Every person who gets a formal job through our platform becomes a potential consumer of our assistive technology products. Second, corporate reputation. Socially responsible companies attract both better talent and more loyal consumers. Third, innovation. Working with underprivileged communities forces us to develop more efficient and accessible solutions, which can later be applied in other markets. Charles Bennett, the legal director, asked the next question. How do you handle legal liability issues? If someone is harmed through opportunities facilitated by our platform, can the company be held responsible? We structured the project as facilitation, not a guarantee, Eleanor replied. We connect people and opportunities, but the responsibility for the work relationship remains between employer and employee, following all applicable labor laws. Richard, who had remained silent until then, finally spoke up with a question that carried the weight of his real concerns. Eleanor, you've done an impressive job of research and planning, but I have a fundamental concern about execution. He paused dramatically before continuing. Ethan, without wanting to disrespect your personal abilities, do you have experience in managing budgets of $500,000, in coordinating multidisciplinary teams, in dealing with pressures from diverse stakeholders and conflicting expectations? The question was phrased politely, but its subtext was brutal. Richard was publicly questioning whether Ethan had the competence to lead a project of that magnitude. Ethan felt the silence of the room weigh on him like a blade. He knew his answer at that moment could determine not only the future of the project, but his own credibility within the company. Richard, you're right. I've never managed 500,000 corporate dollars, but I managed family resources when any mistake meant not having food on the table. I've never coordinated multidisciplinary corporate teams, but I coordinated community groups where failure meant real people losing real opportunities to improve their lives. He paused, choosing his next words carefully. The skills you mentioned can be learned. Integrity, commitment, and a genuine understanding of the problem we're trying to solve. Those can't be taught in an MBA. The response created a moment of tense silence. Edward observed the interaction with evident interest, while other executives processed Ethan's boldness in responding so directly to a senior inquiry. Besides, Ryan added, breaking the silence, none of you have experience living on less than $1,000 a month. That doesn't make you incompetent to manage corporate budgets. It just means that different people bring different valuable perspectives. Ryan's observation completely changed the dynamic of the room. He had, with elegance and intelligence, turned Richard's argument against him. Edward smiled openly for the first time during the presentation. Very well put, Ryan. Diversity of perspectives is exactly what we need to solve complex problems. Paula Montgomery consulted her notes before asking the next question. Assuming we approve the pilot project, how will we measure success? What will be our indicators that the investment is generating a return? Eleanor activated the final section of the presentation. We established 3 categories of metrics. First, quantifiable social impact, number of people employed, average increase in family income, number of small businesses supported. Second, corporate benefits, positive media exposure, employee satisfaction with the company's social purpose, development of new markets. Third, sustainability, the platform's ability to self-finance through small fees on successful transactions. And the timeline, Charles Bennett asked. 6 months for development and implementation of the pilot, 3 months for evaluation of results, then a decision on expansion. Edward looked around the table, assessing the expressions of his executives. Does anyone have additional questions? Richard raised his hand one last time. Edward, I need to register my concern. This project, however well-intentioned, represents a significant reputational risk. If it fails publicly, Horizon Tech will be associated with unfulfilled promises to vulnerable communities. And if it succeeds, Edward replied, it will be associated with social leadership and technological innovation. Richard, great breakthroughs always involve calculated risks. The room was silent for a few moments while Edward consulted his notes. Very well. I'll ask you to leave the room for a few minutes while we deliberate. Eleanor, Ethan and Ryan waited in the outer corridor, where large windows offered a panoramic view of the city. None of the three spoke, each lost in their own thoughts about what they had just experienced. "Regardless of the outcome," Eleanor said finally, "you two were brilliant in there." "Do you think we made it?" Ethan asked. "I think we gave our best possible presentation. Now it depends on factors beyond our control." 15 minutes later, Claire appeared in the hallway. "Mr. Sterling would like to see you again." When they returned to the room, Edward was smiling in a way that immediately calmed their nerves. By 5 votes to 3, the Digital Bridges project has been approved for pilot implementation. The explosion of joy from the three was contained but visible. Eleanor closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the weight of months of work being validated. Ethan felt as if a giant door had opened to possibilities he had never imagined reaching. Ryan smiled with the satisfaction of seeing that authenticity and truth could still win in environments where politics and self-interest normally prevailed. "There are some conditions," Edward continued. "First, detailed monthly reports to the board. Second, direct financial supervision with me personally. Third, rigorous evaluation after 6 months with the possibility of termination if results do not meet expectations." "We accept all conditions," Eleanor replied immediately. "Excellent. Claire will provide all contractual documents and budget authorization. You can start on Monday." When they left the boardroom, the three walked in silence until they reached the elevator. It was only when the doors closed that the reality of what they had achieved truly hit them. "We did it," Ethan said, his voice loaded with disbelief and gratitude. "We did it," Eleanor confirmed, hugging both Ethan and Ryan in a moment of spontaneous celebration that transcended corporate hierarchies. But while they celebrated, none of the three realized that at the end of the hall, Richard was watching through a glass window, his expression carrying a determination that suggested the project's approval had been only the beginning, not the end, of the challenges they would face. 6 months had passed since the approval of the Digital Bridges project, and Oakwood Heights was unrecognizably transformed. What began as a timid pilot had become a powerful demonstration of how technology, when applied with wisdom and human sensitivity, could catalyze real changes in the lives of real people. Ethan walked through the streets of the community that Monday morning, observing tangible signs of the impact his work was generating. A small sign at the entrance to the neighborhood announced "Connected Community, Digital Bridges Project," but the true evidence of transformation was much more subtle and profound. Maria, the seamstress they had interviewed months ago, now operated a small clothing manufacturer in her backyard, employing 3 neighbors and selling clothes to downtown stores through the digital platform they developed. John, the self-taught electronics technician, had obtained formal certification through online courses subsidized by the project and now worked at a maintenance company with a full salary and benefits. But what impressed Ethan most were the less obvious changes, the visible increase in self-esteem on people's faces, the proliferation of small businesses that arose naturally when opportunities became accessible, the community energy of people who finally saw concrete paths to improve their lives. "Ethan," a familiar voice called him. It was Mrs. Connie Jenkins, president of the Neighborhood Association, who had become his most important ally in the project's implementation. "Good morning, Mrs. Jenkins. How are things?" "Son, I can't believe what we've achieved. Last week, 5 more people got jobs through the platform. And look at this." She showed her phone, where the Digital Bridges platform displayed real-time statistics. 247 people employed through the system, 89 small businesses registered, user satisfaction rate at 94%. "The numbers are impressive, but what moves me most are the stories," Ethan replied. "Yesterday I talked to a mother who got a work-from-home job and can now take care of her kids while earning a stable income. And you? How are you feeling about all this?" Mrs. Jenkins' question made Ethan pause to reflect. 6 months ago, he was just an unemployed young man being rejected in interviews. Now he was co-director of a project that had changed hundreds of lives and was being studied by other companies as a replicable model. "Sometimes I feel like I'm living someone else's life," he admitted, but I also feel like I've finally found my purpose. You're different, you know. More confident, more sure of yourself. Mrs. Jenkins, may I ask you something? Sure. What really changed was the project, or was it me? She smiled with the wisdom of someone who had observed many people grow over the years. Son, the project gave you opportunities to show who you always were. You haven't changed. You just found space to bloom. Later that morning, Ethan met Eleanor and Ryan at the temporary headquarters they had established within the community itself. It was a simple space, 2 rooms in a rented house, but it functioned as the operations center to coordinate activities in 5 different communities. Eleanor was on the phone, talking to someone about replicating the model in other countries. Her English had developed local accents after months of working directly with residents, a change she embraced as a symbol of her own personal transformation. Ryan coordinated a group of community youth who had been trained as project ambassadors. They were reviewing data from a new community that had requested inclusion in the program, assessing specific needs and available resources. How was the talk with Mrs. Jenkins? Eleanor asked when she finished her call. Inspiring, as always. She asked me a question I couldn't completely answer. What? Whether we changed or whether the circumstances around us changed. Ryan looked up from his papers. Man, that's an easy one. You two changed completely. How so? Eleanor asked, curious about her friend's perspective. Eleanor, when I met you, you were competent but distant. You talked about people as statistics. Now you know families by name, you understand specific problems. You've made decisions based on real empathy, not just theoretical analysis. And Ethan, she teased. Ethan always had a good heart, but now he has the self-confidence that comes from knowing his ideas can become reality. Before he dreamed of making a difference. Now he knows he can. And you, Ryan? Ethan asked. How have you changed? Ryan was pensive for a moment. I learned that my street perspective has value even in corporate boardrooms, that I can speak the language of both worlds without losing my authenticity. The conversation was interrupted when Eleanor's phone rang. It was Claire from Horizon Tech. Eleanor, I need to speak with you urgently. It's about the project. What happened? Richard has called an extraordinary board meeting for this afternoon. He has grave concerns about irregularities in the project. Eleanor felt her stomach turn. In recent months, Richard had made several subtle attempts to question aspects of the project, but this was the first time he had taken formal action. What kind of irregularities? I don't know specifically, but he brought documents and said he has evidence of resource mismanagement. That's ridiculous. All expenses were approved and documented. I know. But Eleanor, he seems determined, and he convinced Paula and Charles to support him. When Eleanor hung up, she explained the situation to Ethan and Ryan. The atmosphere in the room immediately changed from celebration to apprehension. Do you know of anything Richard could be distorting? Eleanor asked. All our expenses were legitimate, Ethan replied. Equipment, salaries, operational costs, everything within the approved budget. Maybe it's not about real money, Ryan suggested. Maybe it's about creating the impression of impropriety. What do you mean? Man, corporate politics is like regular politics. Sometimes it doesn't matter if you did something wrong. It only matters if they can make it look like you did. Eleanor realized Ryan had captured something important. Richard didn't need to prove real mismanagement, only sow enough doubt to question the team's competence. We have to go back to the loop, she decided. If we're going to be judged, at least we'll be present to defend ourselves. The trip back to Horizon Tech was tense. Eleanor mentally reviewed every financial decision they had made, every contract they signed, every process they implemented. She was confident everything had been done correctly, but she also knew Richard was skilled at finding problems where they didn't exist. When they arrived at the company building, the atmosphere was visibly different. Employees greeted them with sympathy, but there was also a palpable tension, as if everyone knew something important was happening. Eleanor, Claire intercepted them as soon as they stepped out of the elevator. Edward wants to speak with you before the board meeting. In Edward's office, Cooper greeted them with his usual enthusiasm. But Edward looked concerned in a way he rarely showed. "Guys, Richard has brought serious accusations. He alleges that you exceeded budget authorizations, made contracts without proper approval, and created procedures that bypass corporate policies." "That is completely false," Eleanor replied immediately. "I know, but he has documents that seem to support his allegations." "What kind of documents?" Ethan asked. "Contracts with values different from what was originally approved, receipts for expenses that don't appear in official reports, communications suggesting you hid information from the board." Ryan frowned. "That sounds like sabotage," Eleanor completed. "He forged evidence." "It's a serious accusation," Edward warned. "If you're going to allege forgery, you need to be absolutely sure." "I have all the original documents," Eleanor said. "I can prove that anything Richard presented has been altered." "Then that's what we'll do. We'll go to the meeting, you present your defense, and we'll resolve this once and for all." The boardroom was more tense than any previous meeting. Richard had organized an elaborate presentation with projectors showing documents that looked official, but that Eleanor immediately recognized as altered versions of legitimate contracts. "Directors," Richard began, "I have discovered grave irregularities in the Digital Bridges project that compromise not only the financial integrity of the company, but our corporate reputation." He activated the first image, a contract that showed a payment of $50,000 to a consulting firm Eleanor had never hired. "This is just one example of unauthorized spending that totals over $100,000. Eleanor stood up, pulling out her laptop. "May I show the original document for that contract?" Richard altered values and removed sections that explain the legitimate nature of these payments. "Eleanor," Richard replied calmly, "accusations of forgery are extremely serious. I hope you have solid evidence." "I have all the evidence necessary." Eleanor projected the original document, clearly showing where Richard had made alterations. The difference was obvious to anyone comparing the two versions side by side. "In addition," Ethan added, "all these expenses were pre-approved by Edward and documented in our monthly reports, which you yourselves approved in the last 6 meetings." The silence in the room was deafening. Richard had been publicly exposed trying to sabotage the project through fabricated evidence. Edward broke the silence. "Richard, would you like to explain the discrepancies in the documents you presented?" "There must be some misunderstanding, perhaps different versions of contracts." "There is no misunderstanding," Eleanor said firmly. "There is a deliberate attempt to destroy a successful project through false accusations." Paula Montgomery, who had supported Richard earlier, now looked uncomfortable. "Edward, I think we need a formal investigation into what happened here." "Agreed. But first, I would like to hear the real results of the Digital Bridges project." Ryan stood up, activating a presentation they had prepared as a 6-month report. 247 people employed. Average family income increase, 340%. 89 small businesses supported. 5 communities requesting inclusion in the program. User satisfaction rate, 94%. He paused, looking directly at Richard. "These are results any company would be proud to achieve. The question is, why would someone try to destroy such a clear success?" Edward observed the expressions around the table before speaking. "Directors, we have 2 issues to resolve. First, does the Digital Bridges project deserve expansion? Second, what action do we take regarding the sabotage attempts?" The vote was unanimous. Expansion of the project to 10 new communities, budget increased to $2 million, and a formal investigation into Richard's actions. When the meeting ended, Richard left the room without speaking to anyone. His attempt to destroy the project had failed spectacularly, but it had also revealed how far some people would go to maintain the status quo. "Do you realize what you've just achieved?" Edward asked when they were alone. "What?" Eleanor replied. "You didn't just save the project. You proved that integrity and competence can win over politics and manipulation." That night, while celebrating at a simple cookout in Oakwood Heights, Ethan reflected on the journey that had brought him there. 6 months ago, he was rejected for not having an adequate profile for the corporate world. Now, he had not only found his place in that world, but helped change it. "What are you thinking about?" Eleanor asked, sitting next to him. about how life can change when someone believes in your potential, and how we change when we believe in the potential of others. They looked at Ryan, who was making the community kids laugh with his stories, and at the hundreds of people whose lives had been touched by the project. "You know," Ethan said, "I think I finally understand the difference between success and fulfillment." "What is it?" Eleanor asked. "Success is getting what you want. Fulfillment is discovering that what you want is helping others get what they need." 18 months had passed since that frustrating morning when Ethan was rejected in the job interview that seemed to represent another closed door in his life. Now he was standing on the stage of the McCormick Place Convention Center before an audience of 2,000 business people, academics, and community leaders about to receive the National Social Innovation Award. The transformation had been so profound that sometimes he still surprised himself when he saw his reflection in the mirror, not just physically, though the well-tailored suits and confident posture were obvious evidence of change, but mainly in the way he saw the world and his place in it. Where before there was insecurity and limitation, now there was purpose and infinite possibility. Eleanor was by his side on stage, equally transformed by 18 months of work that had completely redefined her understanding of business leadership. Her hair was now worn loose more often, a reflection of an informality she had embraced upon discovering that authenticity was more powerful than corporate perfection. She had found her voice as a social leader, combining technical sophistication with genuine human passion. Ryan, wearing his first tuxedo, smiled at the audience with the natural confidence of someone who had finally found an adequate stage for his talents. Of the three, he was perhaps the one who had changed least externally, but who had gained most in terms of recognition for the value of his unique perspective. He had become a living bridge between worlds that rarely communicated effectively. "Ladies and gentlemen," the presenter announced, "the Digital Bridges project has not only transformed individual lives, but created a replicable model that is being implemented in 16 states and 7 countries across Latin America." The statistics that appeared on the giant screen behind the stage were impressive. More than 15,000 people employed through the platforms, 2,000 small businesses supported, an average family income increase rate of 400%, expansion to 50 communities with a waiting list of another 200 requesting inclusion. But the numbers, however impressive, did not capture the true dimension of the transformation. They didn't show stories like Maria's, who now ran a seamstress cooperative employing 23 women. They didn't reflect John's journey, who had become a technical instructor, teaching his self-taught skills to youth in other communities. They didn't quantify the cultural change in companies that discovered that social responsibility generated not only ethical benefits, but real competitive advantages. "What makes this project especially notable," the presenter continued, "is that it was developed and led by people who personally lived the realities they sought to transform. It represents a new paradigm of social development, solutions created with communities, not for communities." When Ethan approached the microphone for his acceptance speech, he observed the audience and saw faces representing sectors of society that rarely gathered in the same space. Conservative businessmen sitting next to community activists, theoretical academics talking with street entrepreneurs, young idealists sharing tables with experienced executives. 18 months ago, he began, his voice carrying the confidence of someone who had learned that his perspective had value. "I was just another young man from the South Side being rejected in job interviews for not having the adequate profile for the corporate world." A laugh of recognition ran through the audience. Many there knew the feeling of rejection based on subtle but persistent prejudices. "Today I realized that the problem wasn't my profile. It was a system that wasted talent by not being able to see potential beyond artificial social codes." He paused, allowing his words to resonate. Eleanor Sterling had the courage to bet on an impossible partnership. Ryan Santos brought wisdom that no university teaches. Edward Sterling created space for dreams to become reality. But mostly, hundreds of people in dozens of communities had the courage to believe they deserved better opportunities. Eleanor took the microphone, her voice carrying the emotion of someone who had discovered her true professional purpose. This award is not ours. It belongs to every mother who got a job and can support her children with dignity, to every young person who discovered their talents have market value, to every entrepreneur who transformed creativity into a livelihood. She looked at Ethan and Ryan before continuing. But mostly it belongs to all the people who taught us that real solutions only emerge when humility meets determination. Ryan approached the microphone last, and his presence on stage represented perhaps the most symbolic transformation of all. "I grew up believing that people like me didn't have a place in spaces like this," he said, gesturing to the elegance of the convention center. "That our only option was to accept crumbs and say thank you." His voice gained strength as he continued. "Today I know we don't have to accept crumbs. We can sit at the table and help decide. The menu." The audience exploded in applause. Ryan had captured, with his characteristic metaphor, the essence of the social transformation they had catalyzed. After the ceremony, while the award party took place in the adjacent halls, the three met on a silent terrace overlooking the city. Chicago stretched to the horizon, its lights blinking like terrestrial constellations connecting millions of individual stories. "Do you believe what we've achieved?" Eleanor asked, her voice mixing disbelief and satisfaction. "Sometimes I feel like I'm living a dream I don't want to end," Ethan replied. "It's not a dream," Ryan said. "It's proof that reality can be changed when the right people join for the right reasons." Sarah had arrived for the ceremony, wearing a new dress Ethan had insisted on buying for her. Throughout the evening, she had watched her son with pride that transcended words. Now she approached the three on the terrace. "Son, can I say something?" "Of course, Mom." "Do you remember when you were little and said you were going to change the world?" "I remember." "I always believed you would. I just didn't know how it would look." Sarah hugged not only Ethan but Eleanor and Ryan too, including them in the expanded family they had created through their joint journey. Edward appeared on the terrace, Cooper at his side. The dog had aged a bit, but still carried the same intelligence in his eyes that had recognized something special in Ethan on that fateful morning 18 months ago. "Cooper wants to greet the heroes of the night," Edward said, smiling. Cooper approached each of them, receiving affection that demonstrated the genuine love that had developed among them all. He had been inadvertently the catalyst for a transformation that now benefited thousands of people. "Edward," Eleanor said, "may I ask something I've always wanted to know?" "Always." "In that first meeting when you offered the partnership to Ethan, did you really know it would work?" Edward laughed, stroking Cooper while thinking of the answer. "I knew Ethan had character. I knew you had competence. I knew that together you could create something special. But I admit even I didn't imagine it would be something of this magnitude." "And aren't you afraid that success will change us?" Ryan asked. "I'm afraid of the opposite. I'm afraid you'll stop changing, stop growing, stop dreaming of even greater transformations." The conversation was interrupted when Claire appeared on the terrace with an expression of evident excitement. "Eleanor, I just received a call. The World Bank wants to meet with you to discuss implementing the digital bridges model in other developing countries." "Really?" Ethan asked, still processing the magnitude of the opportunity. Completely serious, they identified the project as one of the most effective social innovations they have ever analyzed. Eleanor looked at Ethan and Ryan, seeing in both their eyes the same mixture of excitement and responsibility she felt. "That means our journey is just beginning," she said. "It means that now we have the opportunity to make a difference on a global scale," Ethan added. "It means," Ryan concluded with a smile, "that we're going to need to learn new languages." As they returned to the party, the three reflected on the distance traveled since that morning when Ethan saved Cooper in the middle of traffic. It had been more than a professional trajectory. It had been a transformation of paradigms about human possibilities, about the power of authenticity, about the value of diverse perspective. 6 months later, Ethan was in Geneva, presenting the digital bridges model to representatives from 15 countries. Eleanor headed an international division of Horizon Tech, focused exclusively on social innovation. Ryan had become a global consultant in community development, taking his practical wisdom to places where academic theories had failed. Edward, watching from his wheelchair in the office that now coordinated operations across 4 continents, smiled as he read reports on transformed communities from the US to Indonesia, from Peru to Senegal. Cooper, now officially retired but still present in important meetings, slept peacefully by the desk, dreaming perhaps of that day when he chose to run into traffic and inadvertently changed the world. The story had begun with a young man rejected for not having an adequate profile for a job opening. It had evolved into a powerful demonstration that the most inadequate profiles sometimes carry exactly the perspectives the world needs to solve its most complex problems. Sarah, now living in her own house that Ethan had bought in the same neighborhood where he was raised, proudly kept newspaper clippings about her son's achievements, but her greatest pride didn't come from the awards or recognition. It came from knowing that the humble and kind boy she had raised had become a powerful man who used that power to lift others. In communities around the world, people who would never hear the names Ethan, Eleanor, or Ryan benefited daily from a development model that proved a simple but revolutionary truth. Lasting solutions for poverty and inequality only emerge when those who live these problems become the architects of their own solutions. The digital bridge had become much more than technology. It had become a metaphor for human possibility, a demonstration that apparently separate worlds could not only connect, but create together more just and prosperous realities for everyone. And somewhere in Chicago, on a Tuesday morning, a 22-year-old young man woke up for another job interview, carrying dreams that seemed too big for his current reality, not knowing that the world had silently changed to create space for dreams exactly like his. End of story. Dear listeners, we hope that the journey of Ethan, Eleanor, and Ryan has deeply touched your hearts. This story reminds us that extraordinary transformations often begin with simple acts of kindness, that authenticity can overcome prejudice, and that real solutions to complex problems emerge when people from different worlds have the courage to build bridges of mutual understanding. If you were moved by this narrative of overcoming, purpose, and the transformative power of human collaboration, leave your like, subscribe to the channel, and share in the comments which moment of the story resonated most with you. Every day we bring stories that reveal the extraordinary potential within apparently ordinary lives, showing that every person carries seeds of transformation just waiting for the right conditions to bloom. We wait for you in the next episode with another narrative that celebrates the courage to dream big and the determination to turn dreams into reality.